I spent the morning tying ribbons to the backs of chairs. They weren't anything fancy, just soft peach and ivory, a color scheme I found on a Pinterest board a few months ago. I hadn't expected to care this much about things like centerpieces or napkin folds, but there's something comforting about lining things up and knowing they'll stay where you put them. The living room still smells faintly of fresh paint. I had it done last week. It's strange what a coat of warm white can do to a room. It makes the light bounce, softens the corners, makes it feel like a space that belongs to someone who's ready to start over. I keep telling myself, that's what this is. A beginning, not just an event. I bought this house a year ago, after saving for longer than I want to admit. It's not huge, but it's mine. Every light switch, every squeaky floorboard. I chose this. That means something, I think. The baby's due in 8 weeks. The cot's already assembled, tucked away in what used to be the spare room. There's a pale green blanket folded neatly over the edge. I caught myself staring at it the other day, as if it might start moving, as if she's already here. I've never thrown a party for myself, not a real one. I always thought it was a bit much, but something shifted when I saw that second line appear on the stick. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I felt like something was just mine, not shared, not borrowed, not someone else's moment that I was standing beside. Still, I hesitate at the idea of calling this a celebration. That word feels loud, too shiny. I think of it more like a marker, a way to say, this is where it starts, right here, with the cake and the balloons and the paper signs that say, Mummy to be. I hung those signs myself. Took longer than I thought to get them straight. I didn't ask anyone for help. It's quiet now, the kind of quiet you only get when everything's clean and still and waiting. In a few hours, the house will fill. With noise, voices, movement, the rustle of gift bags and tissue paper. But for now, it's just me. Me and the soft swell of music from the speaker. Me and the shape of my daughter pushing gently against my ribs. I touch my belly and close my eyes. Welcome home, I think. This is yours too. The first knock came just after 1. I'd barely had time to check my reflection in the hallway mirror. Smooth. Down the front of my dress, fixed the one curl that never sits right, before the door swung open and my mum's voice filled the room. You didn't wear the blue one? She asked. Not even a hello. I smiled, tight. This one fits better now. She gave me a once-over like I was a mannequin in a shop window. You're glowing, though. That's good. That's good. Like it wasn't inevitable. Dad followed behind her, juggling a foil-covered tray and a bottle of wine, neither of which I asked for. He mumbled something about traffic, then headed straight for the kitchen like he still lived here. I watched his back disappear into the tiled space I spent 3 weekends redoing last summer. My brother arrived 20 minutes later, late as usual, all limbs and noise, and that smug grin that's somehow always been forgiven. Ethan. Golden boy. The firstborn who never had to clean up after himself because there was always someone else who would. Hey, Prego, he said, holding out a paper bag. Brought you something sugary. I took it and set it down without looking. Thanks. Chahdu was already looking past me, scoping out the snacks on the dining table, asking if I had any beer. I didn't, of course. Not that it stopped him from complaining. God, you didn't even get a 6-pack. It's a party, isn't it? It's a baby shower, I said. Same difference. I felt my mouth press into a line. It always starts like this. Little things. Offhand comments. Tiny jabs wrapped in familiar tones. It's been years of this. Being just enough to be included. Never enough to be celebrated. More guests arrived in waves. Friends from work, a couple of neighbors, even my old uni flatmate who brought an impossibly tiny baby cardigan that made something squeeze inside my chest. I kept moving, handing out drinks, smiling at compliments, answering the same 4 questions over and over. Due wine. Date? 8 weeks? Name picked? Not yet. How are you feeling? Tired, mostly? Is the father in the picture? No, but I'm okay with that. And I was. At least, I thought I was. Until I noticed Ethan whispering with Dad in the corner, both grinning like boys with a secret. My mother hovering nearby, eyes flicking between them and me. Something was coming. I could feel it like a pressure drop in the room, and even before it happened, I knew. They weren't here for me. Not really. I was in the kitchen, fiddling with the decorations I didn't quite know how to arrange, when my mother's voice echoed from the other room. It wasn't loud, but the way it cut through the chatter, it was different. Something had shifted. "Ethan, darling, come on. Tell everyone what you've been waiting to say." I didn't turn around. Didn't need to. The room went quiet, just for a moment. It was one of those silences that felt thick, like everyone knew something before I did. I swallowed hard. My mother's voice was full of that proud, syrupy tone she always used when she was about to parade Ethan in front of an audience. Ethan. Got into college, you know. Harvard. They accepted him early. So proud. Harvard. Of course. My stomach dropped, not because of the achievement. It was his 4th college acceptance letter in as many months, but because this was the moment they'd been waiting for. The moment where Ethan would get all the attention, all the glory, while I stood here in the corner of my own house, invisible. I walked back into the room just in time to see Ethan holding up his phone, the acceptance letter glowing proudly, on the screen like a trophy. The small crowd of friends and family applauded, as they always did when something big happened for him. I stood by the door, arms crossed, my baby pressing against my ribs in a reminder of everything that was mine, everything that I was going to have to prove. "Wow, Ethan," one of the neighbors said, a woman with too much enthusiasm in her voice. "Harvard? That's amazing. Your parents must be over the moon." And they were. Mom's eyes sparkled with that same shine they always got when anyone, gave her son the attention she craved. Dad was clapping so loudly I could hear his palms slapping together like he was at a football match. I wanted to disappear. Ethan took the spotlight for a few minutes, throwing in his usual blend of humble bragging and self-deprecation, pretending to be modest, while clearly basking in the glow of his achievement. It was the same routine, the same act, and yet my heart clenched each time. This was his moment, and he wasn't about to let me ruin it. Not that I would have tried. He didn't even notice when the conversation drifted back to the baby shower. He didn't see my eyes, burning with frustration. He didn't feel the shift in the room when I moved out of the spotlight. I stood there, a silent spectator, while my parents made sure to ask all the questions about Ethan's future. "What are you majoring in? What will your career path be? Are you thinking of joining a fraternity?" Every word that left their mouths was like a slap, a reminder of how easily they overlooked me, how easily I faded into the background despite all my efforts to step forward. And as much as I tried to smile through it, I could feel the weight of it all. The way my mother's proud eyes never lingered on me for longer than a passing glance. The way Dad, despite being physically in the room, was more present in the world of Ethan's achievements than anything I could offer. And there it was, the moment I knew for sure. This was always going to be their show, but it didn't have to be mine. Not anymore. As the evening stretched on, I found myself standing off to the side, holding my plate of food, pretending to nibble on the hors d'oeuvres. But truthfully, I wasn't tasting any of it. I was too busy watching, too busy observing how the conversation flowed so effortlessly around Ethan, how my parents showered him with questions, praise, and admiration. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I set my plate down on the counter, taking a breath to steady myself before stepping outside, onto the porch. It was a quiet escape, one I'd taken often in the past when the weight of it all became too much. I leaned against the wooden railing, feeling the cool evening air brush against my face. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to calm the rushing thoughts that clouded my mind. When I opened them again, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the sliding glass door. There, I stood, swollen with child, a woman who had somehow become invisible in her own home. The reality hit me like a hammer. I wasn't just a bystander in my own life. I had allowed myself to fade into the background, to exist only when they needed me. And now, standing on the brink of motherhood, I realized just how much of myself I had lost in the process. The baby stirred inside me, and for a moment, I let myself feel the life growing within. This little person, my daughter, would never be invisible. She would never have to fight for attention, for validation, or for love. I would make sure of it. But to do that, I would need to change the way I saw myself and the way I allowed others to see me. I sighed, pressing my hand against my belly. I could feel the tears threatening to surface, but I held them back. Crying wouldn't fix this. Crying wouldn't change the fact that I had spent years in the shadow of a family that could never quite see me. In the stillness of the night, I knew what I had to do. The decision came quietly, almost as a whisper in my mind. I wasn't going to let this continue. I wasn't going to stand by while my parents favored Ethan, while they ignored everything I had done for them. I had spent so much time sacrificing my own dreams, my own needs to keep the peace, but peace had never come. I was the one who had suffered in silence, who had watched as they held Ethan on a pedestal, as they allowed him to take whatever he wanted, while I was left to pick up the pieces of their neglect. And now, with a baby on the way, it was time for me to finally choose myself. I glanced back into the house through the glass door, seeing my mother laughing at something Ethan had said. She didn't even know I was standing there, that I was watching, or that I was making the biggest decision of my life. I turned away, my mind made up. This wasn't just about the baby shower. It wasn't just about the way they had overshadowed me for years. This was about finally taking control of my life and carving out a space for myself and my daughter. No more pretending, no more waiting for them to notice me. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. The days following the baby shower passed in a blur. I felt the stirrings of something inside me that I hadn't felt before. Clarity. There was no dramatic confrontation, no explosive moment where everything fell apart. It wasn't a loud, fiery revelation. It was subtle, like the calm before a storm, but I knew that something was shifting inside me. It wasn't going to happen overnight. Change never did. But I could feel the tension inside me building, like a string being pulled taut. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the only person who had the power to release that tension was me. The first step was simple. I had to start setting boundaries. The family dynamics had been skewed for so long that I had forgotten what it meant to assert myself. But it wasn't just about saying no or making demands. It was about reclaiming my sense of worth, my dignity, and my voice. It started with small things. A simple conversation with my mother, who'd called to ask how I was feeling after the shower. She was full of concern, but there was that familiar undercurrent of guilt tripping. "Ethan's so excited about college," she said, as though his future was the only one that mattered. "You must be so proud of him, dear. He's such a bright boy." I took a deep breath. "I am proud of him, Mum," I replied, my voice steady. But there was something new in it, something stronger than before. "But I'm also proud of myself. And this baby, this new chapter in my life is just as important. And I need you to see that." There was a pause on the other end of the line. My mother didn't know what to say. She never did when I spoke my truth. I could hear the uncomfortable shuffle of her words as she tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Of course, dear, of course. But you know how it is, right? He's our firstborn. We just want the best for him." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I had always wanted the best for me too, that I had spent years trying to meet their expectations, to make them proud of me, only to be ignored. But I didn't. I knew better than to expect her to truly understand. Instead, I let it go. I ended the call politely, but inside, I felt a small sense of victory. The next few days were a series of quiet but firm decisions. I told my parents that I would no longer be hosting their Sunday family dinners at my house. I was tired of being the one who put on a facade of family unity when all I received in return was neglect. It wasn't a dramatic move. I simply told them I needed a break. When my brother called to ask for help with a school project, I told him I couldn't do it because, honestly, I was already stretched too thin, and helping him felt like one. More way, I was being asked to disappear. "I've got a lot on my plate right now," I said, my voice unshaken, "and I need to focus on my own life for a change." He was surprised, but not upset. Ethan had always been good at reading the room, knowing how to get what he wanted without causing a scene. But this time, there was no room for his usual manipulations. I was done being the person who dropped everything for him. Later that week, I went to the bank. I had already made up my mind that I was going to start the process of getting them out of my house. It had taken me months to get my finances in order, to save enough to cover the expenses. But now I had a nest egg. I had the means to take control of my space, and I wasn't going to wait any longer. I walked up to the counter, asked for the necessary paperwork, and began the process of evicting my parents and Ethan from my home. It felt surreal, almost as though I was taking a step into the unknown. But with every step, I felt more grounded, more certain. This wasn't just about property or a roof over my head. This was about claiming my life, my space, and my future. It was the first real step toward breaking free from a family dynamic that had stifled me for years. And for the first time in a long while, I felt proud of myself. The decision to begin the eviction process wasn't something I shared with anyone. It felt like a personal victory, one that was still too fragile to discuss openly. Besides, who would I even talk to about it? My friends were supportive, but they didn't truly understand the complexities of my family. I had never let them in on the full extent of the emotional weight I carried. For the first time in years, I was taking a stand for myself. And as much as that felt like a victory, there was a nagging sense of guilt that kept creeping in. It wasn't guilt for what I was doing, but guilt for what I was not doing, what I was withholding. I had always been the peacemaker, the one who kept things together. Now, I was choosing to disrupt the delicate balance that had existed for so long. It didn't take long for the tension to build between me and my family. My parents seemed to notice the shift almost immediately. They would call, but conversations were increasingly strained. I wasn't as quick to pick up the phone. As I used to be, I didn't answer texts right away. And when I did engage with them, there was a quiet formality in my tone, like I was speaking to strangers rather than family. It wasn't just that I was distancing myself. I was beginning to see them for who they really were, and who they had never been for me. My mother would still call to check on me, but there was always an undertone of disappointment when we spoke. I could feel her judgment lingering in the air, and I knew that deep down she was angry. Not at me, but at the fact that I had stopped playing the role she had assigned me all these years. The most telling moment came one evening, a few weeks after the baby shower. I was sitting in the living room, trying to relax after a long day, when my phone rang. It was my mother. "Darling," she said, her voice bright but tinged with something else, something I couldn't quite place. "How are you? Ethan mentioned you weren't feeling well. Everything okay?" I hesitated. My first instinct was to downplay it, to tell her I was fine, that it was nothing. But instead, I chose to be honest. "I'm okay, just a bit tired. It's been a lot, recently." There was a pause. "You've been so quiet lately. It's not like you?" The words stung more than I expected. It was as though she was subtly accusing me of abandoning my family. I could almost hear the unspoken, "Why aren't you doing more for us?" hanging in the air. "I've just been focusing on my own life," I said, my voice steady. But there was a tremor in the pit of my stomach. "I have to think about what's best for me now, Mum. I can't always be the one holding everything together. Not anymore." There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear her trying to process what I had said, trying to find the words to respond, but she couldn't. And that silence, that pregnant pause, spoke volumes. She wasn't used to hearing me speak like this. She wasn't used to me putting myself first. Finally, she sighed. "I just don't want you to get lost in all of this. Family is important, you know." I bit my lip to keep from saying something harsh. "I know, Mum, but I'm family too, and I matter." I hung up shortly after, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was the first time in a long while that I had been completely honest with her, and I could tell it had shaken her. But it also felt like the first step towards something bigger. For the first time, I wasn't trying to fit into a mold that didn't suit me. I was carving out space for myself, for my future, and for my child. The following days were filled with more small but significant moments of defiance. I began to notice how much my brother had taken me for granted. Ethan was always the golden child, the one whose needs were met first, whose achievements were celebrated the loudest. He was the one who could do no wrong. but I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. One evening, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, when Ethan walked in. He didn't even greet me at first. He just sat down at the table, opened a book, and started mumbling something about his college applications. It hit me in that moment. He was still treating me like I was the background noise of his life, the one who would always be there to pick up the pieces. I was just the older sister, the one who quietly supported him without ever expecting anything in return. But that wasn't me anymore. I took a breath. "Ethan, I need to talk to you about something," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. He looked up, slightly surprised. "What is it?" "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I said. "And I need to be clear with you. I'm not going to keep enabling you. I've spent too many years prioritizing everyone else's needs over mine, and that stops now. I need you to start taking responsibility for your own life, your own actions. I'm not going to keep cleaning up your messes." There was a long silence between us. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed, as if he wasn't sure how to respond. For once, he was the one who was taken aback. "I don't know what you mean," he said, his voice defensive. "I mean," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, "that I'm not going to be the one you always rely on. I've done that for too long, and it's not fair to me." I saw something flicker in his eyes. Annoyance, maybe, but it was quickly replaced with something else. I couldn't tell if it was guilt, or if he was just realizing for the first time that I wasn't going to be around forever to play my part in the family drama. "I've got a lot to figure out, Ethan," I continued, "and I can't keep doing this. You need to figure your own stuff out." He muttered something under his breath and stormed out of the room, but for the first time, I didn't feel bad. I didn't feel like I had crossed a line. I had simply set a boundary, one that was long overdue. The weeks after my conversation with Ethan were tense, and the cracks in our family dynamic only deepened. My parents continued to make their subtle remarks, trying to steer me back to the person I had always been, the dutiful daughter, the obedient sister. But each comment, each look, only made me more resolute in my decision to change things. I had always been the one to keep the peace, the one who absorbed the discomfort and quietly carried the weight. But the truth was, peace had come at a high cost. I had spent my entire life bending to their expectations, never questioning what I needed or what I wanted. And now, with my baby on the way, that couldn't continue. I could no longer afford to ignore myself in favor of a family that saw me only as a convenience, not as an individual. In the weeks leading up to my decision to finally evict my parents and brother, I found myself questioning what had kept me tethered to them for so long. The answer was simple, but difficult to face. Fear. Fear of disappointing them. Fear of the fallout. Fear of the family I had always known falling apart. But in those quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts, I realized that my fear had been nothing more than a cage. I had built it for myself, brick by brick, and I was the only one who could tear it down. And I would. I had made that promise to myself, and now it was time to follow through. One evening, after a particularly long and exhausting day at work, I came home to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table. It was just the two of us. There was no one else around, no distractions, no subtle pressure from my father or brother. I knew it was the perfect time to have the conversation I had been avoiding for so long. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice firm but calm. My mother looked up, her expression unreadable. "Of course, darling. What's on your mind?" I sat down across from her, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about everything lately, about how things have been between us, and about my future. And I've come to a decision." She raised an eyebrow, the faintest trace of suspicion in her eyes. "A decision about what?" "I'm going to evict you and Dad. I can't keep living like this. You've treated me like an afterthought for so long, and it's time for me to put myself first." Her face went pale, her eyes widening in disbelief. "What do you mean, evict us? This is our home, too. We've always lived here." I felt my pulse quicken, but I didn't back down. "It's my home now, Mum. I've been paying the mortgage for years. This house is mine. You and Dad have had your time here. but things need to change. I need space to raise my daughter, and I need to do it without the constant pressure of living up to your expectations." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You can't just throw us out. We're your family. We've always been here for you." I held my ground, refusing to let her words shake me. "No, Mum. You've always been here for yourselves, not for me. I've spent my entire life accommodating you, trying to meet your needs and expectations, and it's never been enough. You never saw me for who I really am. You only saw me as the person who could help hold everything together, without ever considering what I needed in return." The anger in her eyes was palpable. "This is ridiculous. You've always been the good one, the one who never caused trouble. What happened to you?" "I grew up, Mum," I said, my voice steady. "I realized that being the good daughter wasn't enough anymore. I need more than this. I need more than your constant disappointment, more than Ethan's entitlement, and more than your expectations. I'm done being the one who sacrifices everything for everyone else." Her eyes welled up, but there was no guilt, no recognition in her expression, just anger. "You think this is easy for me? I've been doing everything for this family, and now you want to throw us out just because you're too good for us?" I shook my head, the frustration bubbling up inside me. "It's not about being too good, Mum. It's about taking care of myself. It's about choosing me over all the years of neglect and manipulation. I have nothing left to give to you, not unless you're willing to finally see me for who I am." There was a long silence between us. The tension in the air felt thick, suffocating. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, but she wasn't ready to admit that she had played a part in this. Instead, she stood there, looking at me with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Fine," she said quietly. "You want to throw us out? Then go ahead. But don't expect me to ever forgive you for this." I stood up, my heart racing, but my resolve stronger than ever. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Mum. I'm doing this for me, for my daughter, and no one is going to stop me." As I walked out of the room, I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. But at the same time, I knew it was the right choice. I was finally taking control of my life. I was finally putting myself first. The eviction was a necessary step, but it was also just the beginning. I wasn't just evicting my parents. I was evicting the past, the years of resentment, the years of being unseen, unheard, and unappreciated. And in its place, I was making room for something better. For me. For my daughter. For a future where I would never again let anyone define my worth. The days that followed my conversation with Mum were surreal. The house felt different, quieter, like the air itself was holding its breath. I could feel the tension building, but at the same time there was an eerie stillness, a calm before the inevitable storm. Ethan didn't bring up the conversation at all. I wondered if he was too afraid to confront me, or if he simply didn't care enough to react. Either way, his silence spoke volumes. Mum, on the other hand, was acting as though nothing had happened. It was as if she was pretending that the world hadn't just shifted beneath her feet. But I saw through the facade. I could see the way her eyes darted around the house, her lips pressed tightly together whenever she thought I wasn't looking. She was simmering, her anger bubbling just below the surface, waiting for the moment to explode. I couldn't help but wonder if this had been her plan all along, if she was just waiting for me to make the first move so she could pull the rug out from under me the moment I let my guard down. But this time, I was ready. I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. No matter what she threw at me, no matter how much guilt she tried to heap on my shoulders, I wasn't going to budge. In the midst of all this uncertainty, one thing remained clear to me. I had to move forward with my plan. I couldn't let myself be held back by the fear of what was coming. I had to create a future for myself, one that wasn't tainted by the dysfunction of my past. I spent the following days preparing. It wasn't just about the eviction. There were other things I had to sort out. Financials, legalities, making. Sure, the house would be mine in every sense of the word. I reached out to a solicitor just to make sure I was doing everything by the book. I needed to cover my bases, to ensure that when the time came, I could stand firm in my decision. But even as I arranged everything, There was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Was I doing the right thing? Was this the best course of action for my baby? I had grown so used to questioning myself, so used to seeking validation from others, that the idea of following my instincts without hesitation felt foreign to me. But then I remembered what my mother had said that night. "You've always been the good one." I was tired of being the good one. I was tired of doing what was expected of me, of keeping the peace, of sacrificing myself for the sake of others. My baby deserved better than that. She deserved a mother who put her needs first, who was willing to fight for the life she wanted. And so, with each passing day, I grew more resolute. I was no longer the girl who had quietly accepted neglect and favoritism. I wasn't the one who tiptoed around everyone's feelings, hoping to keep things from falling apart. I was a mother now, and I had a responsibility to myself and to my daughter. I would be the one to set the boundaries. I would be the one to decide when enough was enough. But then, one afternoon, as I was going over the details of my plan, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was Mum. I hesitated for a moment before answering, my heart racing. I'd been expecting this, knowing that she wouldn't let things slide for long. "Hello?" I said, my voice tight. "Darling, can we talk?" she asked, her voice unnervingly calm. My stomach twisted. I could hear the underlying tension in her words, the slight edge of desperation. "What about?" "I don't want us to fight anymore. This isn't you, is it? You're not the kind of person who just throws their family out. This isn't how we've always been, is it?" The guilt started to creep in, but I pushed it back down, remembering everything I had already been through. "This is exactly how it's always been, Mum. You just never saw it. You never saw me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment I thought she might hang up, but then her voice came again, softer this time. "I'm sorry, darling. I never meant to hurt you." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I knew this was a trap. This wasn't an apology, it was manipulation, a last-ditch attempt to pull me back into the fold, to make me doubt myself and give in to the guilt she always used so effectively. But I wasn't falling for it. "I've heard that before, Mum," I said, my voice firm. "And I'm done. I'm done trying to fix things that were never really broken to begin with. I'm done trying to be the one who holds everything together." There was a pause before she spoke again, her voice cracking with emotion. "But you're my daughter. You're my family. Don't I deserve to have you?" I closed my eyes, taking a moment to center myself. This was it. The point of no return. The storm was finally breaking. "Mum," I said softly but with finality, "you deserve to have a family that values you, but that's not me anymore. I can't keep sacrificing myself for you. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I need you to understand that this is what's best for me now." The line went silent again. This time I didn't try to fill the void with empty words. I just waited. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fine," she said. "Do what you have to do." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking, but I was resolute. The storm had finally come, and there was no going back. The days that followed my conversation with Mum felt like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I had thought that once I had made my decision, everything would feel clearer, easier even. But instead, I felt like I was sinking deeper into an ocean of uncertainty. The aftermath of our conversation was far more complicated than I had anticipated. Mum barely spoke to me after that phone call, and when she did, it was always in a tone that felt strained, like she was holding something back. The quiet tension between us was suffocating, and I knew that the calm I had once believed to be peace was now a mere illusion, masking a storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed to act as if nothing had changed at all. He continued to behave as though I was just a passive bystander in my own life. The same glib, dismissive attitude I had grown so accustomed to was there, only now it seemed more pronounced. He had no idea what I had been through, what I was trying to do for myself and my daughter, but it was clear that he didn't care. I could feel his indifference like a slap in the face, a constant reminder of how little I had ever mattered to him. In the evenings, I would retreat into the spare room, the one I had always considered mine, even though it had become little more than a place to escape from the constant presence of my family. I could hear Mum and Ethan talking downstairs, their voices muffled by the walls. But I could sense the underlying tension, the cracks beginning to show in the carefully constructed facade they had built. I had thought that this moment, this confrontation, would finally bring me the freedom I so desperately needed. But instead, I felt trapped, like I was stuck in a cycle of guilt and resentment that I couldn't break free from. One night, after another pointless argument with Ethan about something trivial, I found myself sitting in the dim light of the spare room, staring at the empty walls. It had become my sanctuary, my one place of solace. As I sat there, a wave of frustration washed over me. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I forced them back. No more tears. Not for them. I was done. It was then that I realized just how far I had come, how much I had changed in the past few weeks. The woman who had once been content to be a silent observer in her own life was gone. In her place was someone who had found the courage to stand up for herself, someone who wasn't willing to let the years of neglect and favoritism define her any longer. But as much as I had grown, the reality of the situation began to sink in. I wasn't just going to have to cut ties with Mum and Ethan, I was going to have to sever the very ties that had once defined my identity. The house that had been my home for so long was no longer a safe place. It was a battleground, and every inch of it reminded me of everything I had endured. I had been running away from this moment for so long, convincing myself that things would improve, that maybe I could make them understand. But now, as I sat in the dim light, I knew there was no going back. I could already feel the walls closing in around me. The hardest part was yet to come, the eviction. I had made my decision, but that didn't mean it was going to be easy. No matter how much I tried to prepare myself, I couldn't escape the reality of what I was about to do. I was going to ask my parents, no, not ask, demand that they leave the house. This house. The place where I had spent so much of my life. The place where I had watched my family crumble. Time and time again. But even as I mentally prepared for the difficult conversation, a part of me wondered, was I being too harsh? Was I just following through on a decision made in anger and frustration? Was I, in some way, repeating the same pattern that had caused so much pain in the first place? But then I remembered the look on Mum's face when she had said, "You're my daughter, you're my family." She hadn't meant it. She hadn't meant any of it. Her words, however desperate they seemed, were just another way to hold me captive, to manipulate me into doing what she wanted. I couldn't fall for it anymore. I wasn't just protecting myself, I was protecting my baby too. My daughter deserved better than this. A life free from the toxic web of manipulation, neglect, and indifference that had plagued me for so long. No more. In the days that followed, I began making the arrangements. I reached out to the solicitor again, double-checking the paperwork, making sure I was ready. It felt like I was preparing for war, except I wasn't fighting anyone but my own family. As I ran through the legal details in my head, I couldn't help but think back to the conversation I had with Mum. How many times had she tried to convince me that I was family, as if that word held some kind of magical power, as if it could erase everything that had happened, everything I had endured. But family wasn't about words. It was about actions. And Mum had failed me. Ethan had failed me. They hadn't seen me, not really. And that was the hardest part of all. I had spent so long trying to be seen by them, trying to prove that I was worth something. But now I realized the truth. It wasn't me who had been blind all these years. It was them. It was time to move on. It was time to choose myself and my daughter over a family that had never truly seen me. I had made my decision, and there was no turning back now. The days following the baby shower passed in a blur of exhaustion and internal conflict. Every time I walked into the house, I felt the weight of their presence, the feeling of my family's eyes on me, watching, waiting for something. I wasn't sure what. It's a strange sensation to have people around you, yet feel so alone. I had spent years in that house, and it never truly felt like my own. Not really. It had always been a symbol of the sacrifices I'd made, the compromises I'd agreed to, but I was done with that. I spent the next few days going through the motions, the baby shower gifts unpacked, the decorations taken down, and the chaos slowly ebbing away. But the chaos inside me, that was growing, swelling, filling me with a sense of purpose I couldn't ignore. I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly pushing aside my own needs for the sake of a family that would never value me the way I deserved. My brother's announcement had only made it clearer. The way he announced his college plans, his father's pride glowing in his eyes, the way my mother had beamed. And I had been standing there, a pregnant woman in a room full of people, feeling like an afterthought, like a shadow in the background. For years, I had been the one to hold things together. When my parents fought, when things weren't going well with their work or with my brother, I was the one who picked up the pieces. I was the one who made sure everything ran smoothly, made sure no one saw the cracks. But now I was seeing those cracks, and they were no longer something I could ignore. I hadn't wanted to confront this yet, not so soon, but the reality was impossible to deny. It had been eating away at me for so long, and I knew deep down that I needed to take the first step. It was time to stand up for myself. It was time to choose me. I made a decision that day. As I stood in the middle of the living room, the house quiet for once, the weight of my brother's announcement still heavy in my chest, I realized that I had spent far too long allowing myself to be overshadowed. My family had neglected me in ways they couldn't even comprehend, but I had allowed it. I had let them push me into the background, let them dictate what my life should look like, even though they never cared about the sacrifices I made to keep the peace. That ended today. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. I knew there would be resistance, and not just from them. There would be guilt. There would be questions. There would be anger. But I was ready for all of it. I had to be. For too long, I had been afraid of their reactions, of what they would say or how they would react to me standing up for myself. But no more. Not anymore. I'd been given a gift. My unborn daughter. The little girl growing inside of me, depending on me, counting on me. She was my future, and I couldn't let her grow up in a world where her mother was constantly belittled, ignored, and neglected. She deserved better. I deserved better. So I picked up the phone, fingers trembling slightly, but my resolve firm. I dialed the number for the lawyer I'd been researching for weeks now. A sense of calm washed over me as the phone rang, knowing that this was the beginning of something that would change everything. There was no turning back now. The phone call felt like a strange kind of liberation. When the lawyer answered, I gave my name, explained the situation with as much detachment as I could muster, and set up a meeting. It wasn't just a meeting. It was the first step in taking control of my life. I was no longer going to play the role of the dutiful daughter, always putting my family's needs before my own. It was time to make sure that, for once, I came first. The days leading up to the meeting felt surreal. I could almost hear the voices in my head, the ones that had been there for years, reminding me that family is everything, that I owed them, that I needed to keep the peace. But as I sat in the quiet of my home, with only my unborn daughter's gentle kicks for company, those voices felt weaker, less convincing. What was it, after all, that I was holding on to? A family that barely acknowledged me unless they needed something. A home that had never truly felt like mine, just a place where I existed to fulfill everyone else's expectations. I had spent too long looking for approval that would never come, too long pretending that their neglect didn't hurt, too long hoping for a love that wasn't there. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was tired, and the realization that I didn't have to stay in this situation was like a breath of fresh air. The lawyer's office was clean, modern, nothing special, just a place where legal matters were handled. It wasn't the most welcoming space, but it was efficient. I sat across from the lawyer, a woman in her mid-40s with a kind but professional demeanor. I explained everything. the family dynamics, my plans for the future, the house that I owned, and the quiet resentment that had been building over the years. "You've been living with a lot of weight on your shoulders," she said, her voice steady and compassionate. "And it sounds like it's finally time for you to take the steps you need for your own well-being and the well-being of your child." I nodded, fighting the lump in my throat. There was something about hearing someone validate what I had been feeling for so long that made it all seem more real. She wasn't offering me sympathy, just acknowledgement, and that was enough. It was all I needed. We spent the next hour discussing my options. The eviction process wouldn't be easy, especially considering the emotional fallout that would likely come with it. But it was possible. The fact that I was the homeowner and had a legal right to evict made it a little more straightforward, though my brother and parents might try to fight it. But that was a battle I was prepared for. I couldn't let fear control me anymore. After the meeting, I sat in my car for a while, just taking in everything we'd discussed. The relief was almost overwhelming. I wasn't just planning to stand up for myself, I was planning for a future where I could raise my daughter without the constant undercurrent of resentment and favoritism hanging over me. A future where I could be the mother I wanted to be without being diminished by people who had never truly seen me. I knew the next steps wouldn't be easy. They'd come with pain, with resistance, but I was ready for it. For the first time in years, I felt like I was making a choice that wasn't about anyone else but me and my daughter. As I drove home, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a step towards something that felt like freedom, a life that wasn't dictated by anyone else's needs or expectations. It was my life, and it was time to live it. The phone call with my parents was scheduled for the evening. I had been dreading it, imagining all the possible reactions. My father's anger, my mother's tears, my brother's defensiveness. But as I sat in my living room, the quiet hum of the evening settling in, I realized I was no longer afraid of their responses. I had made my decision. I had taken the first step, and now there was no turning back. I picked up the phone, dialing the number with a steady hand, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. "Hello?" My mother's voice came through, hesitant, as if she had already sensed that something was off. "Hi, Mum. It's me," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral, but it was impossible to disguise the knot of tension in my stomach. "I need to talk to you and Dad about something important." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear her mind racing, trying to anticipate what was coming. "Of course, darling. What's on your mind?" "I've made some decisions about my future," I started, gathering the courage to lay it out. "About my home, about where I'm going in life." Her voice shifted slightly, but it wasn't the sound of alarm or concern. It was more like a mild curiosity, as if she wasn't quite prepared for the seriousness in my tone. "What do you mean? Are you planning to move?" The question felt like a trigger. I had been moving through my life, waiting for someone to acknowledge the sacrifices I had made, the emotional toll, the years spent looking after everyone but myself. And now, this was it. It was my turn to take control. "No, Mum, I'm not planning to move," I said, my voice firm. "I'm planning to make some changes, big ones. I'm evicting you and Dad." There was a sharp intake of breath. I could feel her confusion, her shock. But there was also something else. Something familiar. A sense of disbelief. It wasn't the first time I had surprised her with something, but this time, it was different. This time, there was no room for negotiation. "Evict us? What do you mean?" she asked, her voice rising. I could almost see her standing in the kitchen, trying to piece together what I was saying. "I've been thinking about this for a long time, Mum," I replied, forcing myself to stay calm. "I've been giving everything to this family, and I've never asked for anything in return. But I'm done. I'm done putting everyone's needs ahead of mine, especially now that I'm having a baby. I need a fresh start, and I can't have you and Dad living in my house anymore." There was a long pause, and then, in the most heartbreaking way, she whispered, "But this is your family. "Don't you want us with you? Don't you need us?" That question, her words, so simple yet so heavy, struck me like a punch to the gut. Of course I needed them. Or at least, I had convinced myself I did. But the truth was, I didn't need their suffocating presence anymore. I didn't need their emotional neglect wrapped in empty promises of love. I needed peace. I needed space to breathe, to grow, to raise my daughter in a way that felt right. "I've needed you all my life, Mum," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But you never saw me. You never saw what I was doing for this family. You never saw how much I sacrificed. I've had enough. I can't do it anymore." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. And for a moment, I almost regretted it. But then I remembered why I was doing this. I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was standing up for my daughter. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said, her voice now small, almost pleading. "You're making a mistake." "I'm not," I replied, more firmly than I thought I could. "This is the best decision I've ever made. I'm doing what's right for me and my child." The conversation ended in silence, and I placed the phone down with a heavy sigh. It wasn't a win, it wasn't closure, but it was the beginning of something new. A new chapter for me, for my unborn daughter, and for a life that wasn't dictated by my parents' demands or my brother's needs. As I sat there, the reality of what I had just done sank in. This was it. There was no turning back now. No more second guessing, no more hoping they would change. It was time to focus on my future. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally doing something just for me. Part 13. The days following the phone call with my parents were strangely quiet. There were no frantic messages or tearful calls begging me to reconsider. It was as if they, too, had come to terms with the unspoken truth that this was something I had to do. They may not have understood it, but I could feel them retreating into the silence that had become so familiar in our family dynamic. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, the soft glow of my bedside lamp casting long shadows across the room. I felt lighter than I had in years, but there was also a deep ache, a quiet sadness that clung to me. I knew what I had done was right, but the weight of walking away from them, really walking away, with no plans to look back, was beginning to sink in. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I reached over to check it. A message from Sarah, my closest friend, popped up on the screen. "How are you doing?" "Ew." I let out a breath and typed back. "It's been tough. I feel like I've just closed the door on everything I've known. But I know it's the right thing." It didn't take long for her to reply. "You've made a brave decision. I'm so proud." "Of you?" A smile tugged at the corner of my lips. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear those words. Sarah had always been there for me, the one person who understood my struggles without needing to be told every detail. She didn't judge, and she didn't try to fix me. She just listened. That was something I hadn't had much of in my family. I, leaned back against the headboard, my thoughts drifting to my baby girl, the tiny heartbeat that had become my anchor through all of this. She was my reason. She was why I had the strength to stand up and say no, to say enough. A few weeks passed, in the quiet aftermath. My parents didn't make any move to call again, and neither did my brother. I had expected them to be angry, to confront me in some way, but their silence was like a heavy blanket over everything. I knew they were hurt, but I also knew that, deep down, they didn't fully understand the depth of what I had done. They had always been the ones to control the narrative, to set the terms of our relationship, and now I was rewriting the script. One evening, I sat down at my kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. The house felt more peaceful, more mine, but there was an emptiness I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't that I missed them, I didn't. It was the recognition that I had spent so many years hoping they would change, waiting for the validation I'd never gotten, and now that chapter was closed. But that didn't make it easier. I was starting to realize how much I had let their actions define me, how much I had allowed myself to believe that I was somehow incomplete without their approval. But the truth was, I wasn't incomplete. I had always been whole. I had always been enough. The realization was like a floodgate opening, and for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to fully grieve what I had lost, not in the way of pity, but in acceptance. I had spent so long trying to make things work with people who didn't see me for who I truly was, and now I was free to see myself in a new light. I was no longer a daughter trying to prove her worth. I was a mother-to-be, strong in my decisions, proud of the path I was forging for myself and my child. The next morning, I woke early, my mind already buzzing with plans. I had a new sense of clarity, a vision for the future that was all my own. I wasn't going to wait around for validation anymore. I was going to make sure I built a life that reflected who I truly was. I began looking through the papers for my next steps, the logistics of getting my parents out, the legalities of changing the locks, making sure everything was in order. It felt so strange, but I also knew it was necessary. They had been living in my home for so long, taking advantage of my generosity without ever considering how it affected me. I was done being the one to keep the peace, to bend and stretch myself to fit into the mold they had created for me. It was time to put myself first. I stood up, pacing around the room, already visualizing the steps I needed to take. I wasn't just evicting them from my home. I was reclaiming my life. I was taking back the narrative they had written for me and finally giving myself permission to write my own. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only way forward. I touched my stomach, feeling the gentle kick of my baby girl. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about what my family expected of me. I was thinking about what I wanted for her, the world I wanted to give her, a world where she could grow up knowing she was loved, not just by me, but by herself, with no strings attached. I was finally choosing me, choosing her, and that felt like the most beautiful thing in the world. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and decisions. I had never imagined that the process of separating myself from my parents would be so detailed, so emotionally taxing. But as I went through the motions, sorting through old documents, contacting a lawyer, planning out the logistics of what was to come, I felt a sense of focus and purpose that I had never known before. This wasn't just about kicking my parents out of my home. This was about reclaiming my sense of self. I'd always tried to make everyone happy. I'd always been the peacemaker, the one who bent over backward to smooth over the cracks in our family, but no more. My baby was coming, and she was going to know a different kind of love. A love that didn't rely on sacrifice, on endless waiting for approval that would never come. She would know love on her terms, just as I was learning to love myself on mine. The lawyer had advised me to proceed with caution. It wasn't just a matter of telling them to leave. I had to do it legally to make sure there were no complications later. It was a difficult pill to swallow, knowing that my parents, who had given me life, would now become strangers in my eyes. But they had made their choices long ago, just as I had made mine. And the choice was clear. I could feel the weight of my decision bearing down on me, but it wasn't the crushing weight I had feared. It was a weight of liberation, of moving towards something new, something I had always deserved but never thought I would claim. I was no longer the girl who lived for the approval of others. I was becoming the woman who lived for herself, and for the child she was about to bring into the world. The phone call came just as I was sitting down to a cup of tea, the quiet of the house surrounding me. I almost didn't answer, not wanting to deal with the inevitable tension that would come from speaking to my mother, but I couldn't avoid it forever. Hello? Is this really happening? My mother's voice trembled through the line. Are you really asking us to leave? I hadn't expected the vulnerability in her voice. It caught me off guard. But as quickly as it appeared, it was replaced with something else, a coldness that I knew all too well. This wasn't just a conversation between mother and daughter. This was a negotiation, a final plea for control. I'm not asking you to leave, Mom, I said, trying to keep my tone steady, but the words felt like they were made of lead. I'm telling you, it's time. You and Dad have overstayed your welcome here. This is my home, and it's time for me to move forward, for me and my daughter. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out, long and painful. Then, my mother spoke again, but this time, there was no vulnerability, just a sharpness, as if she was trying to pierce through my resolve. "You think you're so much better than us now, don't you? You've always thought you were entitled to more, to be more than what you are, but you'll see. You'll see how the world treats you when you're alone." Her words hit harder than I expected. I wanted to retaliate, to snap back, but I knew better. These words weren't new. They were the same ones she had always used to keep me in line, to remind me of my place. The difference now was that I no longer felt the need to listen. "I don't think I'm better than you, Mom. I'm just finally putting myself first. I've spent too many years trying to make you happy, trying to earn your love, but that's not what I need anymore." There was another pause, and for a moment, I wondered if she would hang up. But then she spoke again, her voice softer, almost defeated. "I just wanted to be a good mother to you. I didn't know what else to do." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the sting of her words, but also the finality of what I had to do. "I know you tried, but it wasn't enough. I have to do this for myself now, and for my daughter." The line went dead, and I sat there, holding the phone in my hand, staring at the wall in front of me. The conversation was over, but the weight of it hung in the air. I had said what needed to be said. I had finally stood up for myself, even though it hurt more than I had ever imagined. The next few days passed in a haze of paperwork, preparations, and trying to make sense of what had just happened. My parents hadn't called back, and I hadn't heard from my brother either. It felt as though everything was falling into place, but there was an unease in the air. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I was determined to face it head on. I took a deep breath, setting my phone down, on the table. I needed to stay focused, for my sake and for my daughter's. There was no turning back now. What had begun as a simple desire to have a peaceful home, to feel like I belonged, had turned into something far greater. A reclaiming of my identity, a rebirth. And I was ready for it. I ran my hands over my stomach, feeling the flutter of movement. My baby was coming, and together we would begin a new chapter, a chapter where I chose myself, where I built a life that was truly mine, free from the weight of the past. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. It was mine to shape. The days after my conversation with my mother felt like a strange, surreal space. The world around me continued as it always had, but I felt as though I was walking through it as a different person. There was no turning back now. I was moving towards something that, while terrifying, was also freeing. In the quiet of the house, the hum of life seemed distant. The baby's movements inside me were constant, like a gentle reminder of what truly mattered. I kept my focus on her. She was the reason I was doing all of this. She was the one who deserved more than a family that would only ever make me feel invisible. She deserved the world, and I would give her everything I could, starting with the space to grow, to thrive, without the weight of past resentments hanging over her. The eviction process was set in motion, but there was still a part of me that hesitated. The truth was, no matter how much I had convinced myself that I was doing the right thing, the guilt gnawed at me. What kind of daughter kicks her parents out of her home? What kind of sister pushes her brother away? I tried to distract myself. I spent hours at the nursery, arranging baby clothes, assembling a crib, picturing the day when she would finally be here. But even as I did, I couldn't shake the unease that lingered in the back of my mind. What would it be like when my parents left? Would they understand? Would they hate me forever? I knew the answers to those questions, or at least, I thought I did. The years of neglect, the way my mother and father always made my brother the center of their world, it had all led to this moment. I had tried for so long to make it work, to prove that I was worth their love, but nothing had ever been enough. It wasn't just about the house. It was about everything they had ever said to me, everything they had never given me. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, pulling me from my thoughts. I stared at it for a moment, unsure whether to answer. It was my brother's name flashing across the screen. I had barely spoken to him in weeks, since the night of the baby shower. His college announcement had felt like the final slap in the face, a reminder that, to him, I was invisible. I had been nothing more than the background noise, a footnote in his life, a life that was about to open doors that would likely lead to everything I had never been given. The thought of him calling made my stomach twist. But I had to answer. It wasn't just about him, it was about me, about confronting the remnants of my past. I took a deep breath before sliding my finger across the screen. Hello? There was a pause on the other end of the line, a hesitation I hadn't expected. Hey, it's me. I wanted to check in, he said, his voice awkward. It was rare that he called me just to check in. It felt strange, out of place. I couldn't help but wonder what he wanted. I'm fine, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. I didn't want to let him know how much his call unsettled me. Good, he replied, and there was another uncomfortable silence. I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the baby shower, you know? I'm sorry if it seemed like I took the spotlight or whatever. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. I almost laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Of course, he was sorry, but only because someone had finally pointed it out. It wasn't genuine. It was the apology he gave when he realized he had crossed a line he didn't understand. I don't need your apology, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I immediately regretted my tone, but there was something in me, something raw, that I could no longer contain. It's not about the shower or the announcement or any of that. It's about everything that came before it. You, Mom, Dad, you've always treated me like I was invisible, and I've spent so much of my life trying to be good enough for you, but I'm done. I'm done living for you. There was a long silence. I could hear the faint sound of him shifting in his seat, unsure of how to respond. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than before. I didn't realize it was that bad, you know, he said almost hesitantly. I mean, I get that you feel like you've always been in the background, but I never meant for you to feel left out. I didn't think... Exactly, I cut him off. You never thought about it, because you never had to. You've always been the favorite. You've always been the one who gets everything handed to him. I've spent my whole life trying to be something I'm not just to get a fraction of the attention you get without even trying. And I'm tired. I'm tired of fighting for scraps of affection that will never come. I could hear him taking a deep breath, processing my words. So what now? He asked, his voice quieter. Are we not family anymore? The question hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to answer. Was that what this was? Was I really cutting myself off from my family? It didn't feel like it, not in the way he probably thought. I wasn't trying to erase them. I was trying to free myself from their expectations, from the emotional prison they had put me in. I don't know, I said, my voice quieter now. I don't know what comes next, but I'm not the same person I was before. I'm a mother now. I'm choosing her over everything else. There was another long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. I get it. I really do. I'm sorry I never saw it before. And just like that, the conversation ended. It wasn't a happy ending, not by any means, but it was a step forward, a small acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, he could begin to understand the depth of my hurt. I put my phone down slowly, feeling the weight of the conversation settle into my chest. I had spoken my truth, and even though it was painful, I knew it was what needed to happen. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. The road ahead would be long and uncertain. But as I stood in my kitchen, staring at the phone, I felt a small spark of hope. For the first time in a long time, I was choosing myself. The next few days passed in a haze. It was as if I was existing outside of time, caught between the life I had known and the one I was now building. The house felt emptier somehow, even though it was still filled with the same clutter, the same familiar noises. But the heaviness was different now, more suffocating, because the decision had been made. There was no turning back, no pretending things would ever be the same. My parents and brother would soon be gone, and I would finally have the space to breathe. I spent most of my time in the nursery, arranging and rearranging. The baby's room became my sanctuary, my place of peace amid the storm of emotions swirling around me. The crib was set up, the soft pastel walls ready to welcome her. I placed a few stuffed animals on the shelf, feeling the weight of each small decision. Everything I did now was for her. I wanted her to feel safe here. Wanted her to know that this was a place where she could grow and thrive, far away from the dysfunction that had plagued my own childhood. But even as I worked, there were moments when the guilt crept in again. I couldn't help but think about the time my brother had asked me for a ride to school, or when my mother had called me in tears because my father had been distant. They were all small moments, insignificant on their own, but in the grand scheme of things, they added up to a lifetime of being overlooked, of being made to feel as if I didn't matter. Now, as I prepared to ask them to leave, those moments echoed louder than ever. My phone buzzed again. This time I didn't hesitate. I'd made the decision to stand up for myself, and if that meant dealing with uncomfortable conversations, then so be it. The name on the screen was my mother's. I stared at it for a moment before answering. "Hello." "Hi, sweetheart." My mother's voice was soft, tentative. I was wondering if we could talk. I felt a tightening in my chest, but I swallowed the instinct to shut down. This was the moment I had been avoiding for so long, the moment I had been preparing for, even if I didn't want to admit it. "I'm listening," I replied, my voice steady, even though my heart was racing. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, as if she was searching for the right words. Finally, she spoke, her tone almost apologetic. "I know things have been difficult between us lately, and I just want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. Not intentionally. I'm your mother, and I love you. Always." I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in her words. They were the same words she had said 1,000 times before. Words that always felt empty. The thing was, love wasn't enough. Love didn't undo years of neglect. It didn't erase the hurt of always being the second choice, the one who was pushed aside for everyone else's needs. "I know you love me," I said, keeping my voice calm, "but love isn't enough. It never has been." There was another silence, longer this time, and I could almost feel her trying to process what I had said. "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice breaking slightly. "I've always done my best for you." I could feel the familiar anger rising in me, but I held it back. This wasn't the time for yelling, for rehashing old arguments. This was about drawing a line, about making sure she understood where I stood. "You've always done your best for me, but your best was never enough," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I've spent my whole life trying to prove I'm worthy of your love, of your attention, but you and Dad, you've always had time for my brother, always made him the priority. I've been invisible to you, Mom, and I can't keep pretending it's okay." I could hear her start to cry softly on the other end of the line, but I couldn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't let myself fall into the trap of comforting her, of taking responsibility for the emotions she was unwilling to confront herself. "I can't keep doing this," I continued. "I can't keep living in a house where I'm constantly second place. I've made my decision, and it's time for you and Dad to leave. I'm asking you to move out." There was a sharp intake of breath from her, followed by a long silence. I could hear her trying to steady herself, but I knew this was hard for her. I wasn't expecting her to understand immediately. I wasn't expecting anything other than resistance. "Sweetheart, please," she finally said, her voice pleading. "This house is yours, I know that, but it's our home too. We've been here for so long, we've all built a life together." I felt a cold, bitter laugh rising in my chest. Our life together? The one where they ignored me, treated me like I didn't matter? That life? "You built a life without me in it," I said, my voice hard now. "And that's why it's over. I'm choosing my own life now, Mom, for myself and for my daughter. And that life doesn't include you and Dad anymore." There was another silence, one that stretched on for what felt like hours. But in the end, I knew there was no going back. The decision was made. "I'll give you time," I added softly, trying to make the finality of it all a little easier. "But it's happening. You and Dad need to move out." She didn't answer immediately, and part of me wondered if she would hang up on me, if she would refuse to accept this new reality. But when she finally spoke, her voice was small, almost defeated. "Okay," she said, barely above a whisper. "Okay, I understand." And with that, the conversation ended. I sat there in the quiet of the house, the weight of what I had just done settling in. I had taken the first step toward breaking free, toward rebuilding a life for myself and my daughter. And though it hurt, though I could feel the remnants of guilt gnawing at me, I knew it was the right thing. Finally, I was choosing myself, and that, for once, felt like enough. The days after that conversation were filled with a strange kind of silence. It wasn't that there were no conversations, no attempts to explain, no calls or messages. They just felt empty. It was the silence of things unsaid, of truths that had finally been spoken but not fully understood. My parents were trying, in their own way, to adjust to this new reality, but every attempt to mend the rift only felt more hollow than the last. They were like a cracked vase, trying to hold together pieces that no longer fit. In the days that followed, I took a long, hard look at the house. The once familiar corners, the worn-out couch in the living room, the creaky stairs leading to the bedrooms, they all felt like remnants of a life I was finally ready to leave behind. They were memories, fragments of a past that had never really belonged to me. The house that had been my cage now felt like my refuge. I would walk through it slowly, imagining what it would look like with just me and my daughter. There were little touches I could add, things I could change. Small, simple things that would make it truly mine. It wasn't just about the physical space. It was about creating a space where I could breathe, where I could grow, and where my daughter could grow free of the shadow that had always loomed over me. But even as I imagined this new life, there was still the matter of my brother. My heart ached when I thought of him. I had always tried to protect him, tried to make him see the world beyond his own narrow view. But now, as the reality of his college announcement sank in, I couldn't help but feel a bitter sting. It wasn't just the fact that he had stolen the spotlight at my baby shower, it was the realization that, once again, he had been the golden child, the one who had been given every opportunity while I was left to fend for myself. I hadn't spoken to him since that day, and a part of me wasn't sure I wanted to. What was there left to say? There was a time when I had tried to be there for him, when I had shared my hopes and dreams with him, but he had always been wrapped up in his own world, too busy with his own life to notice mine. He had taken our parents' love for granted, and I had been the one to pay the price for it. Still, there was a part of me that wanted to reach out. I wanted to tell him how much his announcement had hurt me, how his words had cut deeper than he could ever understand. But the more I thought about it, the less I wanted to go back to that place. The place where I was the afterthought, the one who had to silently accept whatever scraps were left. I knew that confronting him would only reopen wounds that had never fully healed, and that wasn't something I was ready for. Not now. Not when I was so close to finally breaking free. It was the next morning when I received a message from him, a simple text asking if we could talk. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment, but I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to explain myself, to tell him that I was hurt, that I had spent my whole life feeling invisible, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I knew I was strong enough to do it, without falling back into old patterns, without slipping back into the role of the accommodating sister, the one who always forgave and always gave. Instead, I put the phone down and made my way to the nursery. I stood there for a while, staring at the crib, at the little things I had carefully placed in the room. It was the first time in my life that I had made a decision purely for myself, without worrying about what anyone else would think or how they would react. It was the first time I had said no to my family and chosen my own happiness over their expectations. And it was terrifying, but it was also freeing. The baby would be here soon, and she needed me to be strong, She needed me to be the mother I had always dreamed of being, not the daughter who was constantly living in the shadow of others. This was my chance to rewrite the story, to create a future where I could finally take up space, where I didn't have to shrink back in fear of disappointing someone else. I couldn't afford to waste it. The thought of standing my ground, of creating a life that was truly mine, filled me with a strange mixture of excitement and fear. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was ready to embrace it. And yet, as I stood there in the quiet of the nursery, the weight of what I had done pressed heavily on my chest. I had made a choice to put myself first. But it wasn't. Without consequence, I knew that my relationship with my parents, with my brother, would never be the same. There would be no going back. They would resent me. They would hold it against me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the hardest part of all. The day had arrived. My baby shower, the day I had imagined for months, the day that was supposed to be all about celebrating my new chapter. Yet here, I was, standing on the edge of it all, feeling more disconnected from my family than ever before. The house was filled with people, the air heavy with laughter and chatter. My friends and relatives milled about, sipping drinks, nibbling on fingers, foods, and admiring the small gifts piled on the table. Yet despite the festive atmosphere, I felt like an outsider in my own life. My brother had arrived with his usual smugness, as though the world revolved around his every move. I could feel the tension in my chest as he walked into the room, his gaze immediately locking with mine. He hadn't spoken to me since our argument. His message had gone unanswered, and the silence between us had become a heavy wall that neither of us seemed willing to scale. I forced a smile, plastering it on my face as I turned away to greet my guests. There was no point in confronting him now, not in front of everyone. It was a familiar dynamic. He was the golden child, and I was the one who had always been left in the shadows. I had spent my entire life trying to make peace with that, trying to make room for his achievements, his dreams, his future. But today, I couldn't do it. Not anymore. The evening unfolded, the hours slipping by as I interacted with my guests, all the while knowing that there was a dark, quiet undercurrent beneath the surface. I was tired, emotionally drained, and I could feel the pressure building in my chest. Every time my brother spoke, every time he laughed, every time he acted like the center of the universe, I felt like a small, insignificant part of a story I wasn't allowed to write. It was supposed to be my day, but it wasn't. As the night wore on, I found myself retreating into the quiet corners of the house, avoiding the growing tension that hung over me like a cloud. My brother's announcement had overshadowed everything, just as I knew it would. It was like a final confirmation that, no matter what I did, I would always come second. At some point, the guests began to trickle out, their cheerful farewells, a blur of sound in my mind. The house felt emptier now, colder somehow. The laughter, the music, all faded into a distant memory as I made my way up to the nursery. The soft glow of the nightlight flickered in the room, casting gentle shadows across the walls. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the crib, my hand resting on the edge. I had promised myself that this would be my new beginning, that this would be the moment I finally chose myself. But the weight of the choices I had made pressed down on me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the full force of everything that was about to change. My brother was right. This was a turning point, a line in the sand, a point of no return. I had chosen to let go of the family I had always known, the family that had never truly seen me, never truly appreciated me. I had chosen to put my daughter first, to build a life for her and me, free from the shadows of their neglect. And yet, as the reality of it all settled in, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right choice. It was hard to shake the feeling that, in some way, I was tearing apart the very fabric of everything I had once known. Family was supposed to mean more than this, wasn't it? But deep down, I knew the truth. My family hadn't chosen me. Not the way they had chosen my brother, not the way they had chosen each other. They had taken me for granted, used me, and expected me to always be there, waiting in the wings. They had never truly seen me, never truly understood the depth of what I had given up for them. As I stood in the nursery, the soft sound of my baby's heartbeat on the monitor soothing me, I realized that I couldn't go back. I couldn't continue to play the role of the dutiful daughter, the one who gave and gave, only to be left with nothing in return. I wasn't just choosing myself, I was choosing my daughter. She was my future now, the person I had to protect, at all costs. And in that moment, I knew that whatever happened next, I would always choose her over the family that had never fully embraced me. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up to see my brother standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I blinked, surprised. For a moment, I couldn't find the words to respond. "I didn't mean to overshadow your day," he continued, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I know I've messed up a lot, and I don't know how to make it right." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything between us. The apology was unexpected, but it didn't change anything. Not yet. Not after everything. "You can't undo what's been done," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But you can choose to do better. For yourself, for me, for our family, and that's something only you can figure out." He nodded slowly, his face a mask of regret. "I will. I promise." But even as he stood there, I knew that this wasn't the moment to fix everything. Maybe there would be a time for that later, but it wasn't now. Now, I had to focus on what mattered most: my daughter, my future, and the life I was about to build on my own terms. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of that future. I was ready to embrace it.